Have you ever felt like you were on the outside looking in during the holidays? Like the whole world was wrapped in warm embraces and twinkling lights while you stood alone in the cold? That's exactly how Sarah Mitchell felt on Christmas Eve 2023, watching families hurry past her apartment window with armfuls of presents and expressions of pure joy. She'd been living in the small town of Evergreen Falls for exactly 3 months, having moved there for a fresh start after a difficult divorce that had left her feeling like a stranger in her own life. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd chosen a town literally named Evergreen Falls, hoping for a new beginning, only to find herself more isolated than ever. And before we dive deeper into Sarah's story, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from right now? I absolutely love knowing where you all are tuning in from, whether you're bundled up in a snowy landscape or enjoying summer sun on the other side of the globe. Drop a comment and let me know your location. It truly makes my day to connect with each and every one of you. But back to Sarah. At 38 years old, she'd imagined her life would look completely different by now. She'd pictured Christmas mornings with children rushing downstairs, a loving partner by her side, maybe even a dog wearing a ridiculous reindeer antler headband. Instead, she had a small one-bedroom apartment above the town's bakery, a job as a freelance graphic designer that kept her glued to her computer screen, and a silence so profound it seemed to echo off the walls. The smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls wafted up through her floorboards every morning, a cruel reminder of the warmth and community happening just below her feet, while she remained separate from it all. The divorce had been finalized in March, right as the last traces of winter were giving way to spring. Her ex-husband, Marcus, had fallen in love with someone else. Someone younger, more spontaneous, someone who apparently reminded him of who he used to be before the responsibilities of adult life had weighed him down. Sarah had seen it coming for months, the way he'd grown distant, the way his phone became a fortress of secrets, the way he'd started working late more and more frequently. She remembered the exact moment she'd known for certain, finding a receipt for an expensive dinner at a restaurant they'd always said they'd try together someday, dated on a night he'd claimed he was working on a big presentation. She'd confronted him that evening, her hands shaking as she held out the small piece of paper that represented so much betrayal. Marcus had tried to lie at first, stumbling through excuses about a client dinner, but Sarah had looked into his eyes and seen the truth before he spoke it. The woman's name was Jessica. She worked in his office building, though not directly with him. They'd met at a company mixer 6 months earlier. It had started innocently, he claimed, just friendly conversations by the coffee machine, then lunch a few times, then something more. When he finally admitted the affair, Sarah had felt an odd sense of relief mixed with devastating heartbreak. At least the uncertainty was over. At least she knew the truth. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. She'd spent weeks replaying their entire relationship in her mind, searching for the moment when things had gone wrong, wondering what she could have done differently, questioning whether she'd ever really known the man she'd married at all. But knowing the truth and healing from it were two entirely different things. She'd left their home in the city, unable to bear living in the space where they'd built so many memories, where every corner held a ghost of what used to be. Her friends, well-meaning as they were, had mostly been couple friends, and after the divorce, the invitations had dried up like autumn leaves. Nobody quite knew how to navigate the awkwardness of choosing sides or rearranging dinner party seating charts. So Sarah had looked at a map, closed her eyes, and pointed. Her finger had landed near Evergreen Falls, a town of roughly 5,000 people nestled in a valley surrounded by pine-covered mountains. It seemed as good a place as any to disappear and start over. The problem with starting over in a small town during autumn, she quickly learned, was that everyone already had their established circles, their decades-old friendships, their family connections that ran as deep as the roots of those ancient pine trees. Sarah would smile and say hello at the grocery store, at the post office, at the coffee shop, and people would smile back with genuine warmth, but that's where it ended. Small talk about the weather, about how she was settling in, about how beautiful the fall colors were, but never an invitation to dinner, never a suggestion to grab coffee and really talk. Never that crucial next step from acquaintance to friend. She'd learned the names of the barista at the local cafe, the woman who ran the post office, the teenager who bagged her groceries, but those interactions remained stubbornly surface level. The barista would remember her usual order, a large cappuccino with an extra shot, and that felt like progress until Sarah realized it was simply good customer service, not actual friendship. She'd tried complimenting people, asking thoughtful questions about their lives, showing genuine interest. But conversations would end with pleasant smiles and "have a nice day" rather than "we should get together sometime." It was like there was an invisible wall she couldn't quite breach, not because people were unkind, but because their lives were already full, their social calendars already packed with obligations to people they'd known for years. She'd tried joining a book club she'd seen advertised at the library, but it turned out to be a group of women who'd been meeting for 15 years, and their conversations were peppered with inside jokes and references to shared history that Sarah couldn't begin to penetrate. They'd been kind enough, making space for her at the table, asking her opinion on the month's selection, a literary novel about family dynamics. But when the discussion inevitably veered into personal territory, Sarah found herself sitting silently while they talked about their children's schools, their husbands' quirks, their shared memories of town events from years past. One woman mentioned her daughter's upcoming wedding, and suddenly they were all sharing stories about weddings they'd attended together, dresses they'd helped pick out, inside jokes about the groom's family. Sarah had tried to contribute, mentioning her own wedding years ago, but the moment felt forced and awkward, and the conversation quickly moved on. She'd attended 3 meetings before quietly stopping, and nobody had reached out to ask why. She'd attended a community yoga class, but everyone partnered up with their regular buddies, leaving Sarah to awkwardly practice alone in the corner, struggling with poses she'd never tried before while everyone else moved through the sequences with the ease of long familiarity. The instructor, a woman named Melissa with an impossibly serene demeanor, had offered Sarah some adjustments and encouragement, but even that felt like professional obligation rather than genuine connection. After class, the other participants would cluster in small groups, making plans to grab smoothies or discussing their weekend plans, and Sarah would roll up her mat in silence, invisible despite standing right there among them. She'd even volunteered at the animal shelter, hoping that mutual love for dogs and cats might be a bridge to connection, but the other volunteers were mostly high school students fulfilling community service requirements, too absorbed in their own dramas to notice the lonely woman cleaning out kennels beside them. Christmas had always been Sarah's favorite time of year. As a child, her parents had made it magical with homemade decorations, special traditions, and a house that radiated love and laughter. Even during her marriage, despite its eventual unraveling, she and Marcus had maintained beautiful Christmas rituals. They'd pick out a tree together, spend an entire evening decorating it while drinking spiked hot chocolate, bake cookies for the neighbors, host a big dinner party on Christmas Eve. The memories were bittersweet now, like looking at photographs of someone you used to be. This year, Sarah hadn't even bothered with a tree. What was the point when there was no one to see it, no one to share it with? She'd strung up some simple white lights around her living room window, more to combat the darkness than to celebrate anything, and she'd bought herself a small poinsettia from the grocery store that was already starting to wilt. Her family was scattered across the country. Her parents had retired to Arizona and were spending Christmas on a cruise through the Panama Canal. Her brother was stationed overseas with the military, and her sister was managing her own complicated family situation with teenage kids who wanted to spend the holiday with their friends instead of flying across the country. Everyone had assumed Sarah had plans. When her mother had called in early December to discuss the cruise, she'd said, "You'll be fine, honey. I'm sure you'll make friends in that little town and have somewhere to go." Her sister had texted, "You should use this Christmas to focus on yourself. Maybe do something totally different. Start new traditions." Her brother had sent a short video message saying, "Hang in there, sis, new beginnings and all that." They all meant well. They all cared. But none of them truly understood the particular flavor of loneliness Sarah was experiencing, the way it felt like being invisible, like she could disappear and the world would simply continue on without noticing the space where she used to be. On Christmas Eve morning, Sarah woke up to the sound of church bells from the Methodist church down the street. She lay in bed for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to muster the energy to face another day. She'd planned to work, actually. She had a client deadline coming up in early January, and burying herself in work had become her primary coping mechanism. Work didn't require vulnerability. Work didn't ask questions about her personal life. Work just needed to be completed. And there was a certain comfort in that simplicity. She made coffee, strong and black, and settled at her small desk by the window. Below, she could see the town square beginning to bustle with activity. Families were taking photos by the enormous Christmas tree that stood in the center, its lights twinkling even in the gray morning light. Couples walked hand in hand, carrying shopping bags and thermoses of what Sarah imagined was hot cocoa or mulled cider. She watched them with a complicated mixture of envy and genuine happiness for them. She didn't begrudge anyone their joy, but witnessing it through glass, separated and apart, made her own isolation feel even more acute. Around noon, she decided to take a break and get some fresh air. Maybe a walk would help clear her head, or at least tire her out enough that she could sleep through most of Christmas Day. She bundled up in her warmest coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and headed downstairs and out into the crisp December air. The temperature was hovering right around freezing, cold enough that her breath formed little clouds, but not so cold that it was unbearable. The sky was heavy with clouds that promised snow, though nothing had fallen yet. Sarah walked without any particular destination in mind, just following the sidewalks wherever they led. She passed houses decorated with elaborate light displays, heard the muffled sounds of Christmas music and laughter from behind closed doors, saw wreaths on every door and candles in every window. Evergreen Falls took its Christmas spirit seriously. That much was clear. The town looked like something out of a Hallmark movie, picture perfect and glowing with holiday cheer. She found herself near the outskirts of town, where the houses grew more spread out and the yards more generous. One house in particular caught her attention. It was a beautiful two-story farmhouse-style home, painted a soft gray with white trim, surrounded by towering pine trees dusted with old snow. The front porch was decorated simply but elegantly with pine garland and white lights, and through the large windows, Sarah could see a massive Christmas tree twinkling with what looked like hundreds of colored lights. A wooden swing hung from a large oak tree in the front yard, and several cars were parked in the driveway and along the street, suggesting a gathering of some kind. As Sarah stood there on the sidewalk, just looking at this scene of domestic warmth and holiday joy, the front door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, pulling on a jacket. He was tall, maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair that was just starting to gray at the temples, and a kind face that seemed built for smiling. He noticed Sarah immediately and raised a hand in a friendly wave. "Merry Christmas," he called out, his voice warm and genuinely cheerful. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, embarrassed to be caught staring at someone's house like some kind of holiday voyeur. "Merry Christmas," she managed to call back, starting to turn away. "Wait," the man said, jogging down the porch steps and across the yard toward her. "Are you Sarah? Sarah Mitchell?" Sarah stopped, surprised. "Yes, but how did you—" "I'm Daniel Cooper. I own Cooper's Hardware on Main Street." He extended his hand, and Sarah shook it, noting how warm it was despite the cold air. "You came in a few weeks ago looking for some picture-hanging supplies. We chatted for a bit about you being new to town." The memory came flooding back. She'd needed special hooks for hanging a large canvas print she'd bought to brighten up her apartment. The man at the hardware store had been incredibly helpful, talking her through different options and telling her about the history of some of the buildings in town. They'd probably talked for 20 minutes, and it had been one of the few genuinely pleasant interactions she'd had since moving here. "Oh yes, I remember. The hooks worked perfectly, thank you," Sarah said, smiling despite her discomfort at being recognized. Daniel smiled back, and there was something in his eyes that looked like understanding, like he could somehow see past her polite surface to the loneliness beneath. "What are you doing out here on Christmas Eve? Just taking a walk?" "Something like that," Sarah said, not wanting to admit she'd been wandering aimlessly because she had absolutely nothing else to do. "It's a beautiful neighborhood." Daniel glanced back at his house, then back at Sarah, and something seemed to shift in his expression, a decision being made in real time. "Listen, this might be forward, and please feel absolutely free to say no, but my family is all inside right now getting ready for our Christmas Eve dinner. My mom, my dad, my sister and her husband and their kids, my brother and his family. It's chaos, honestly, but it's the good kind of chaos. And I couldn't help but notice you're out here alone, and nobody should be alone on Christmas Eve. Would you maybe want to join us for dinner?" Sarah felt her heart do something complicated in her chest, a mixture of hope and terror. "Oh, I couldn't possibly intrude on your family celebration. That's so kind, but you wouldn't be intruding," Daniel said, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "My mom always makes enough food to feed half the town, and honestly, the more the merrier. That's her motto. Besides, we have this tradition where we always set an extra place at the table, kind of a symbolic gesture of welcome and hospitality. This year, that extra place could actually be filled. Please, I'd love to have you join us." Sarah wanted to say no. Every instinct told her to protect herself, to not put herself in a situation where she'd be the outsider, the charity case, the lonely divorcee who got pity invited to someone's family Christmas. But there was something in Daniel's face, in the genuine warmth of his invitation, that made her hesitate. And beneath all her fear and pride, there was a desperate longing for connection, for belonging, for just one evening of not being alone. "Are you sure your family wouldn't mind?" she asked quietly. "I'm absolutely sure," Daniel said. "Come on, worst case scenario, you get a good meal and meet some friendly people. Best case scenario, you actually enjoy yourself. What do you say?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing on the edge of something significant. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, yes, thank you." Daniel's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire appearance. "Fantastic! Come on, let's get you inside where it's warm." Walking up the path to Daniel's house felt surreal, like Sarah was stepping into someone else's life, someone else's story. Her heart was pounding with anxiety, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. Daniel held the door open for her, and she stepped into a front hallway that smelled like pine, cinnamon, and something delicious cooking. The sound of laughter and conversation and Christmas music washed over her like a wave. "Everyone," Daniel called out as he led Sarah through to the living room where his family was gathered. "This is Sarah Mitchell. She's going to be joining us for dinner. Sarah, this is everyone." The room fell into a momentary surprised silence as all eyes turned to Sarah. She felt her cheeks burning, felt the urge to turn and run. But then Daniel's mother, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and the kindest eyes Sarah had ever seen, stood up from her chair and walked directly over with her arms outstretched. "Sarah, how wonderful," she said, pulling Sarah into a warm, genuine hug that smelled like vanilla and roses. "I'm Patricia, Daniel's mother, and you are so very welcome here. Daniel did exactly right by inviting you. We're so happy to have you." And just like that, the tension in the room evaporated. Everyone started introducing themselves, speaking over each other in their enthusiasm. Daniel's father, Robert, a tall man with kind eyes who looked like an older version of Daniel. His sister Emma, a vibrant woman in her mid-30s with curly red hair and an infectious laugh, along with her husband James and their 2 children, Sophie, who was 7, and Michael, who was 9. Daniel's brother Thomas, who worked as a veterinarian, and his wife Linda and their teenage daughter Rachel. They pulled Sarah into their circle without hesitation, without making her feel like an outsider or an object of pity. Emma immediately handed her a glass of mulled wine. Sophie grabbed her hand and dragged her over to see the gingerbread house she'd made. Patricia insisted on taking her coat and hanging it up properly. Robert asked about her work as a graphic designer and actually listened to her answer with genuine interest. As Sarah stood there in this warm, chaotic, loving family environment, she felt something inside her chest begin to crack open, like ice thawing after a long winter. She'd been holding herself so tightly together for so long, maintaining such careful control over her emotions, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to simply be welcomed, to be wanted, to be included. Dinner was called about an hour later, and they all moved to a dining room where a long table was set with mismatched but beautiful dishes, candles glowing, and enough food for twice their number. True to Daniel's word, there had been an extra place setting, and Patricia directed Sarah to sit there, right between Daniel and young Sophie, who was thrilled to have a new friend at the table. The meal was incredible. A massive honey-glazed ham, roasted vegetables, creamy mashed potatoes, fresh rolls that Patricia had baked that morning, cranberry sauce, green beans with almonds, and at least 3 different types of salad. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, everyone talking over each other in that comfortable way that families do. They asked Sarah questions about herself, but never in a way that felt intrusive or pitying. Robert wanted to know about her design work, genuinely curious about the creative process. He told her about a rebranding project the hardware store had considered, but never pursued. And Sarah found herself getting excited, sketching ideas on a napkin while he watched with interest. Emma asked about Sarah's favorite places she'd discovered in town so far, then insisted on writing down a list of hidden gems Sarah needed to visit. A hiking trail with the most spectacular view, a tiny used bookstore in the next town over, a farmer's market that ran even in winter. Thomas shared funny stories about his veterinary practice, including one about a parrot that had learned to mimic a car alarm and drove an entire neighborhood crazy. Linda talked about her work as a school counselor and the challenges of helping teenagers navigate their complicated emotional worlds. Rachel, despite typical teenage reserve, opened up about her passion for photography when she learned Sarah had a background in visual arts. Even the younger children, Sophie and Michael, treated Sarah like she was someone special rather than a random stranger, showing her their drawings, asking her to play games with them, fighting over who got to sit next to her. They made jokes, told stories, teased each other with obvious affection. There was a running gag about Robert's terrible sense of direction, illustrated by a story about him getting lost driving to a family reunion despite having been there dozens of times. Patricia shared an embarrassing tale about Daniel as a teenager trying to impress a girl by cooking dinner and nearly burning down the kitchen. Emma and Thomas reminisced about childhood Christmases, building snow forts and having epic snowball battles that sometimes resulted in tears, but always ended in laughter. Daniel, Sarah noticed, kept checking on her, making sure she had everything she needed, including her in conversations, explaining inside jokes so she didn't feel left out. There was an attentiveness to him that was both thoughtful and unobtrusive, and Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. After the main course, they played a family game where everyone had to share their favorite Christmas memory. The kids went first, talking about presents and snow days. The adults shared stories of Christmases past, some funny, some touching. When it came to Sarah's turn, she hesitated. Her favorite Christmas memories were tied up with people and times that felt painful now. But as she looked around the table at these kind faces, these people who had opened their home to a stranger, she felt safe enough to share. "My favorite Christmas," she said slowly, "was when I was 12 years old. It had been a tough year for my family. My dad had lost his job and money was really tight. My brother, sister, and I knew there wouldn't be much under the tree that year, and we were okay with that. But on Christmas morning, when we came downstairs, our parents had stayed up all night making gifts for us. My dad had carved these beautiful wooden boxes for each of us, and my mom had sewn pillows in the shapes of our favorite animals. They weren't expensive gifts, but they were made with so much love that we could feel it. That was the Christmas I learned that the best gifts aren't things, they're the love and effort behind them." The table was quiet for a moment, and Sarah worried she'd said something wrong, made things too heavy. But then Patricia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's beautiful, dear. Your parents sound like wonderful people." "They are," Sarah said softly. "They really are." The evening continued with dessert, multiple kinds of pie and cookies, and a chocolate cake that Sophie proudly announced she'd help decorate. They moved back to the living room, and someone suggested playing Christmas charades, which devolved into absolute hilarity as they tried to act out increasingly ridiculous holiday scenarios. Sarah found herself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She felt lighter, like some of the weight she'd been carrying had been lifted, at least temporarily. When young Michael chose her for his team in the game, her heart swelled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. As the evening wore on and the children began to get sleepy, families started gathering their things to head home. Emma hugged Sarah tightly and whispered in her ear, "I'm so glad you came. You fit right in." Thomas gave her his business card and told her to call if she ever needed a vet, even though she didn't have any pets. Rachel, the teenager, told Sarah she liked her style and asked if they could connect on social media. Finally, it was just Sarah, Daniel, and his parents left in the quiet house. Patricia was wrapping up leftovers and insisted on sending a huge container of food home with Sarah. Robert had fallen asleep in his chair by the fireplace, and Daniel gently covered him with a blanket. Sarah stood in the kitchen helping Patricia dry dishes, and the older woman looked at her with such kindness that Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "Thank you so much for welcoming me tonight. You have no idea what it meant to me." Patricia set down the dish she was washing and turned to face Sarah fully, taking both of her hands. "Sweetheart, loneliness is one of the hardest things in this world. I know what it looks like because I've felt it myself at different times in my life. When Daniel brought you in tonight, I saw something in your eyes that I recognized, and I want you to know something important." She paused, making sure Sarah was really listening. "You are not alone anymore. Not if you don't want to be. You have a place here with us anytime you want it. This doesn't have to be just one night. Sarah felt the tears she'd been holding back all evening finally spill over. She tried to wipe them away quickly, embarrassed, but Patricia just pulled her into another one of those wonderful hugs. "It's okay to cry, dear. Sometimes we need to let it out." Daniel appeared in the doorway, saw Sarah crying, and looked concerned. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," Patricia said, pulling back and smiling at Sarah. "These are good tears, healing tears." Sarah nodded, trying to get herself under control. "I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. You've all been so kind, and She took a shaky breath. "I've been so lonely. Moving here, the divorce, losing my friends, my routines, everything that was familiar, I felt invisible for months. And tonight, you all made me feel seen. You made me feel like I matter. I don't know how to thank you for that." Daniel stepped forward, his expression soft with understanding. "You don't need to thank us, Sarah. You being here made our Christmas better, not worse. My family loved you. The kids are already asking when you're coming back." "They are?" Sarah asked, surprised. "They are," Patricia confirmed. "Sophie asked if you could come to her birthday party in January. Michael wants you to teach him about graphic design. Rachel thinks you're cool, which is high praise from a 15-year-old. Sarah laughed through her tears, feeling overwhelmed by the generosity of these people, by the unexpected gift of belonging they'd given her. "I'd love to come to Sophie's birthday party. I'd love to see you all again." "Then it's settled," Patricia said firmly. "This is not goodbye, it's hello. The beginning of a friendship, not the end of an evening." When Sarah finally left around 11, with her arms full of leftovers and her heart full of something she was almost afraid to name as hope, Daniel walked her out to her car. The night was clear now, stars brilliant against the dark sky, and snow had finally begun to fall in soft, gentle flakes. "Thank you, Daniel," Sarah said as they reached her car, "for seeing me this afternoon, for inviting me in, for treating me like I belonged." Daniel's expression in the streetlight was earnest and kind. "Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a bunch of strangers. That took courage." "Or desperation?" Sarah said with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "No," Daniel said firmly. "Courage. Real courage. And I meant what I said in there, Sarah. We'd love to see you again. I'd love to see you again. Maybe we could get coffee sometime. I could show you some of the hiking trails around town once the weather warms up. Or we could just talk. I enjoyed talking to you." Sarah looked at him, this kind man who had saved her from the loneliest Christmas of her life. And she felt something shift inside her. Not romantic love, not yet, but the potential for it. The recognition of a good person, a kind soul, someone worth knowing. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd really like that." They exchanged phone numbers, and Sarah drove home through the gently falling snow, feeling like she was living in some kind of dream. When she got back to her apartment above the bakery, the silence that usually felt oppressive now felt peaceful. She unpacked her leftovers, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat by her window watching the snow fall and the town sleep. For the first time since her divorce, Sarah felt genuinely hopeful about the future. She'd taken a risk tonight, accepted an invitation from a stranger, allowed herself to be vulnerable and open, and instead of pain or disappointment, she'd found kindness, community, and the beginning of something new. She'd found a family that had welcomed her without question, a man who had seen her loneliness and responded with compassion, and most importantly, she'd found a part of herself she'd thought was lost, the part that could still trust, still hope, still believe in the goodness of people. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow. Sarah woke to a text message from Daniel. "Merry Christmas, Sarah. My family is already asking when you're coming over again. Mom wants to know if you're free for New Year's Eve. Also, the kids made you cards. I'll drop them by later if that's okay." Sarah smiled, feeling warmth bloom in her chest. She typed back, "Merry Christmas, Daniel. I'd love to come for New Year's Eve. And yes, please drop by anytime. Thank you again for everything." She got up and made coffee, then did something she hadn't done since moving to Evergreen Falls. She called her mother. When her mom answered, Sarah could hear the sound of waves in the background, the cruise ship adventure in full swing. "Merry Christmas, honey. How are you? What are you up to today?" "Merry Christmas, Mom. I'm good. Really good, actually. I have something to tell you." And Sarah told her mother about the previous evening, about Daniel's invitation, about the warmth and welcome she'd found with the Cooper family. She told her about feeling seen and valued for the first time in months. She told her about the tears she'd cried in Patricia's kitchen and the hope she was beginning to feel about her new life in this little town. Her mother was quiet for a moment after Sarah finished, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad. So glad. I've been worried about you being alone there. This is wonderful. These people sound wonderful." "They are, Mom. They really are." Sarah spent Christmas Day in a way she never could have imagined the day before. Instead of working and trying to ignore the holiday, she actually celebrated. She took a long walk through town, appreciating the beauty of the snow-covered streets without the heavy weight of loneliness dragging her down. She baked cookies using one of Patricia's recipes that had been tucked into her leftovers container with a note, "These are our family favorite. Now they can be yours too." She watched classic Christmas movies and actually enjoyed them, instead of feeling like they were mocking her isolation. Around 3 in the afternoon, there was a knock on her door. When she opened it, Daniel stood there with 3 handmade cards from the kids and a thermos of hot chocolate from his mother. "She thought you might want something warm," he said with a grin. "Come in," Sarah said, stepping back to let him enter. "Please, come in." They sat by her window and talked for 2 hours, about everything and nothing. About their lives, their dreams, their disappointments and hopes, about what had brought them to where they were. Daniel shared that he'd been married once too, years ago, but it had ended amicably when they'd both realized they wanted different things from life. He'd chosen to come back to Evergreen Falls to help his aging parents with the family hardware store, and he'd never regretted it, even though it meant a quieter life than he'd once imagined. "Sometimes," he said, looking out at the snowy street below, "the life we plan isn't the life we need. Sometimes the unexpected path is the one that leads us home." Sarah nodded, understanding in a way she couldn't have just 24 hours earlier. "I think I'm beginning to see that," she said. When Daniel left that evening, after helping her hang some new artwork and fixing a leaky faucet she'd been meaning to deal with, Sarah stood in her apartment and realized it felt different. The same space that had seemed like a prison of isolation yesterday now felt like the beginning of a real home. Not because anything physical had changed, but because her perspective had shifted. She'd been so focused on what she'd lost that she'd closed herself off from what she might find. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of new connections and growing friendships. Emma invited Sarah to coffee, and they talked for so long the cafe staff had to remind them they were closing. Thomas and Linda had Sarah over for dinner and a game night. Patricia called to check on her and invited her to come over to learn some family recipes. The kids sent her texts and drawings and funny videos. And Daniel was present in a way that was both exciting and comfortable. They fell into an easy pattern of daily texts, frequent phone calls, and several impromptu visits. He showed her the best spots in town, introduced her to other locals, helped her feel less like an outsider and more like someone who belonged. There was no pressure, no rush, just a natural unfolding of connection. On New Year's Eve, Sarah returned to the Cooper house for another family gathering. This time, she didn't feel like a stranger or a charity case. She felt like someone who was genuinely wanted there. She helped Patricia in the kitchen, played board games with the kids, and as midnight approached, found herself standing on the front porch with Daniel, watching fireworks light up the sky over Evergreen Falls. "Here's to new beginnings," Daniel said softly, raising his glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," Sarah echoed, clinking her glass against his. As the clock struck midnight and the town erupted in celebration, Daniel turned to her with a question in his eyes. Sarah smiled and nodded, and he leaned in to kiss her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. It wasn't a kiss that promised everything, but it was a kiss that promised possibility, that said maybe this could be something real, something lasting, something worth building. When they pulled apart, Sarah felt tears on her cheeks again, but these were different from the tears she'd cried on Christmas Eve. These weren't tears of loneliness and relief. These were tears of joy, pure and simple. "I can't believe this is my life now," she whispered. "A month ago, I thought I'd spend New Year's alone in my apartment. And here I am." "Here you are," Daniel agreed, wiping her tears away with his thumb. "Right where you're supposed to be. Later that night, as the party wound down and Sarah prepared to leave, Patricia pulled her aside one more time. "I want to tell you something, dear. When Daniel was a little boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, we taught him about the importance of paying attention to people who might be lonely or left out. We told him that sometimes the smallest gesture of kindness can change someone's entire world. He took that lesson to heart." She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "When he came in Christmas Eve and told us he'd invited a stranger to dinner, I wasn't surprised. That's who he is. But what did surprise me was how right it felt. How perfectly you fit into our family. Do you know what I think?" "What?" Sarah asked. "I think you were meant to be on that sidewalk at that exact moment. I think Daniel was meant to see you. I think all of this was meant to happen exactly as it did. The universe has a funny way of bringing people together when they need each other most." Sarah hugged the older woman tightly. "Thank you, Patricia, for everything. For raising a son who sees people who need to be seen. For opening your home and your hearts to me. For giving me back my faith in connection and community." "You gave us a gift too, dear," Patricia said. "You reminded us why that extra place at the table matters. Why staying open to new people and new possibilities is important. You made our Christmas special too." Over the following months, Sarah's life in Evergreen Falls transformed completely. She joined a different book club, one that Emma had told her about that was much more welcoming to newcomers. She started having regular coffee dates with a group of women her age who worked from home, all of them freelancers or remote workers who understood the challenges of isolation. She became a regular volunteer at the animal shelter, and this time, she connected with the adult volunteers who shared her love for animals. She even ended up adopting a dog, a 3-year-old mixed breed named Charlie, who'd been at the shelter for months because he was shy and overlooked. The shelter director had warned Sarah that Charlie had some trust issues, that he'd been found as a stray and had clearly been mistreated at some point in his past. He didn't warm up to people quickly, tended to hide in the back of his kennel when potential adopters walked by, and would flinch if someone moved too quickly around him. But Sarah had seen something in Charlie's eyes during one of her volunteer shifts, a sadness and loneliness that mirrored her own experiences. She'd sat outside his kennel for an hour, not trying to touch him or coax him out, just talking softly about her day, about the weather, about nothing in particular. By the end of the hour, Charlie had moved closer to the front of the kennel, his tail giving a tentative wag. The next week, she'd brought him treats and sat with him again. The week after that, he'd let her pet him through the bars. By the 4th week, when she'd opened the kennel door and sat on the floor inside, Charlie had laid his head in her lap and sighed, as if he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to understand him. She'd adopted him that day, and Daniel joked that she and Charlie were kindred spirits, both of them having needed someone to really see them before they could bloom. Sarah couldn't argue with that assessment, watching Charlie gradually relax in her home, seeing him learn to trust again, witnessing his personality emerge as he felt safer. It was like watching her own healing process reflected back at her. When Charlie would greet her at the door with enthusiastic tail wags, so different from those early days when he'd cowered in corners, Sarah felt like she was witnessing a small miracle. They'd rescued each other, really. Her relationship with Daniel deepened slowly and naturally. They took their time, both of them having been through relationship pain before and wanting to build something solid and real. They went on proper dates, had long conversations about their values and goals, introduced each other to their favorite things. Their first official date was in early January, a simple dinner at the town's Italian restaurant where they talked for 3 hours and closed down the place. Daniel was easy to talk to, never judgmental, always genuinely interested in what Sarah had to say. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers rather than just waiting for his turn to speak. Their second date was ice skating at the outdoor rink in the town square, where Daniel patiently held Sarah's hand as she wobbled and laughed her way around the ice, her skating skills rusty from years of disuse. They had coffee dates where they'd sit for hours discussing everything from childhood dreams to current frustrations to hopes for the future. They went on hikes through the snowy woods, with Daniel pointing out different types of trees and sharing local history about the trails they walked. He showed her the spot where his grandfather had proposed to his grandmother 70 years earlier, a rocky overlook with a view of the entire valley. Daniel taught Sarah how to cross-country ski, spending a patient afternoon helping her master the basic techniques while she fell repeatedly in the snow, both of them laughing until their sides hurt. Sarah taught Daniel about design principles and helped him revamp the Cooper's hardware website and signage, spending evenings at his kitchen table sketching logos and discussing color theory and brand identity. She created a whole new visual system for the store that honored its history while making it feel more modern and welcoming. When they unveiled the new sign in March, Daniel insisted on giving Sarah full credit, and several other local businesses reached out asking if she'd help with their branding too. They cooked meals together, trying new recipes and laughing at their failures. They watched movies on his couch with Charlie snoring between them. They attended town events together: a winter carnival, a community theater production, a fundraiser for the fire department. With each outing, each conversation, each shared experience, the connection between them grew stronger and more real. By spring, Sarah had become so integrated into the community that when someone mentioned the new woman in town, people had to think for a moment before realizing they meant Sarah. She wasn't new anymore. She was just Sarah, the graphic designer who lived above the bakery, who had the friendly mixed-breed dog, who was dating Daniel Cooper, who volunteered at the shelter and made incredible cookies for the community fundraisers. The barista at the coffee shop now greeted her by name and had her order ready before she reached the counter. The woman at the post office saved interesting stamps for her collection. The teenagers at the grocery store knew that she always bought fresh flowers on Fridays and would set aside the prettiest bouquets. She'd been invited to join a newly formed book club that Emma had started specifically to be more inclusive and welcoming, and this time, the experience was completely different. Genuine discussions where everyone's input was valued, where friendships were actively being built rather than simply maintained. She'd become friends with 3 other women who worked from home, and they'd established a routine of meeting every Wednesday afternoon at the cafe to work together, sharing the companionship of parallel productivity. They'd become her support system, people she could text when she had a bad day, people who understood the unique challenges of remote work and isolation. Sarah had started teaching a basic design class at the community center on Saturday mornings, working with a group of teenagers who were interested in graphic arts. Watching their skills develop, seeing their excitement when they created something they were proud of, gave Sarah a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. One of her students, a shy 16-year-old named Marcus, which had given Sarah a jolt the first time she heard his name, had discovered a real talent for logo design and was now considering art school, something he'd never thought possible before. His mother had hugged Sarah at the spring recital, tears in her eyes, thanking her for believing in her son. One evening in late April, almost exactly a year after her divorce had been finalized, Sarah and Daniel were having dinner at his house. His parents had gone to visit Emma for the week, so they had the place to themselves. As they sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Daniel took her hand. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Always," Sarah replied. "That day I saw you on the sidewalk last Christmas Eve, I almost didn't say anything. I was running late. I had a million things to do before dinner, and part of me thought it might be weird to invite a stranger to our family celebration. But there was something about the way you were standing there, looking at the house, that made me stop. You looked so alone, but also so hopeful, like you were trying to remember what joy felt like, and I just thought, what if she doesn't have anywhere to go? What if she's facing Christmas alone? I couldn't stand that thought. I couldn't walk back into my warm house full of people I love and leave you out there in the cold." Sarah felt tears welling up again, touched by his words. "I'm so glad you didn't walk away. That invitation, Daniel, it saved me. I'm not exaggerating. I was in such a dark place, feeling so disconnected from everything. I'd started to believe that maybe I was just meant to be alone, that I'd had my chance at belonging, and I'd lost it. But you and your family showed me that wasn't true. You showed me that new chapters are possible, that families can be built not just by blood, but by choice, that home is something you can create anywhere with the right people." Daniel pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You know what the crazy thing is? You saved me too. I'd been going through the motions for a while, working at the store, spending time with family, but something was missing. I'd convinced myself I was content, but I wasn't truly happy. And then you walked into my life, literally walked past my house, and everything changed. You brought this energy, this curiosity and creativity and depth that I didn't even know I was craving. You made me want to be better, do more, live bigger." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Charlie snored softly at their feet, content in his own way. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "Do you remember what your mom said about that extra place at the table? How it's about being open to new people and possibilities?" "I remember," Daniel said. "I've been thinking about that a lot," Sarah continued, "about how much our lives can change when we stay open instead of closing ourselves off, when we let people in instead of pushing them away. I spent so many months after my divorce building walls, protecting myself, keeping everyone at a distance because I was so afraid of being hurt again. But those walls were also keeping out everything good. They were keeping out connection and love and joy." "It's a risk," Daniel acknowledged. "Opening yourself up, being vulnerable, there's always the chance of getting hurt. But there's also the chance of finding something beautiful," Sarah said. "Something real and true and worth the risk. I found that with you, with your family, with this town. I found myself again." Daniel turned to face her fully, his expression serious and tender. "I love you, Sarah. I've probably loved you since Christmas Eve, but I wanted to be sure, wanted to do this right. But I can't hold it in anymore. I love you." Sarah felt her heart expand in her chest, felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. "I love you too," she said. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. But it's the good kind of scary, the kind that means something matters." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, and Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of her divorce, the loneliness of those first months in Evergreen Falls, the desperation she'd felt standing outside this very house almost 5 months ago. If someone had told her then that she'd end up here, in love with a wonderful man, surrounded by people who cared about her, feeling more at home than she'd felt in years, she wouldn't have believed them. But life, she was learning, had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. The following Christmas, Sarah hosted her first holiday dinner in her new apartment. She'd moved into a larger place in the spring, a 2-bedroom rental house with a yard for Charlie and enough space to actually have people over. Daniel had helped her move, along with half the town it seemed like. It had felt like a housewarming and a celebration of community all at once. Now, as Sarah stood in her kitchen preparing dishes for her Christmas Eve dinner, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The preparation had been happening for days, actually. Patricia had spent an afternoon teaching her how to make the family's honey-glazed ham recipe, patiently showing her the exact ratio of honey to brown sugar to mustard, the technique for scoring the ham in a diamond pattern, the timing that would make it perfect. Emma had helped her plan the menu, making sure there was something for everyone, including options for Rachel, who'd recently gone vegetarian, and young Michael, who was a notoriously picky eater. They'd gone shopping together, Emma knowing exactly which stores had the best produce, where to find the specific brand of rolls Patricia always used, which butcher had the highest quality meat. Daniel had spent the previous weekend helping her deep clean the house, hanging lights all around the exterior and interior, fixing a wobbly table leg, making sure everything was perfect. They'd gone together to pick out a tree, spending an hour at the Christmas tree farm, walking among the rows of evergreens until they found the perfect one, a 7-foot Douglas fir with a full shape and the most wonderful pine scent. Daniel had cut it down himself, and they'd tied it to the roof of his truck and driven home with Christmas music playing, and Sarah feeling so happy she thought her heart might burst. Decorating it had been another special evening, with Daniel sharing the history of various ornaments he'd brought from his own collection, telling her stories about where they'd come from, who had given them to whom. She'd added her own decorations, including the beautiful glass heart ornament Patricia had given her the year before, which now held the place of honor on the front of the tree where the lights would catch it and make it sparkle. The house smelled like a perfect blend of pine and cinnamon and vanilla, candles flickering on every surface, soft instrumental Christmas music playing in the background. Sarah had set the table the night before, using dishes she'd collected from various thrift stores over the past few months, each piece different but somehow working together to create something eclectic and beautiful. She'd folded cloth napkins, a skill Patricia had taught her, into elaborate shapes. She'd created a centerpiece from fresh evergreen branches, pine cones, and white candles. Everything was ready, and as she stood there in her kitchen wearing an apron Patricia had given her that said, "Home is where the heart is," she could hardly believe this was her life now. In a few hours, the Cooper family would arrive, along with several other friends Sarah had made over the year. Her book club friends, her coffee group, a few neighbors, the couple who ran the bakery below her old apartment. Daniel came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "It smells amazing in here. You've outdone yourself." "I had good teachers," Sarah said, leaning back into him, "and willing taste testers." She gestured to Charlie, who was lying on the floor with his eyes fixed hopefully on the kitchen counter. "Are you nervous?" Daniel asked. "First time hosting Christmas?" "A little," Sarah admitted. "But mostly I'm just excited. A year ago, I was so alone. And now look at this. Look at what my life has become. I have people coming to my home, people I care about, people who care about me. I have you, I have Charlie, I have traditions and connections and a real life here. It's more than I ever hoped for." Daniel turned her around to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You deserve all of it, Sarah. Every bit of happiness, every moment of joy. You've worked hard to build this life, to open yourself up again after being hurt. That takes real strength." "I couldn't have done it without you," Sarah said. "Without you seeing me that day, without your family welcoming me, without you being patient with me as I learned to trust again." "We helped each other," Daniel said simply. "That's what people do when they love each other." The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the first guests, and Sarah took a deep breath, smoothed down her dress, and went to answer it with Daniel by her side. The next few hours passed in a beautiful blur of laughter, conversation, good food, and genuine warmth. Sarah found herself watching her living room full of people and feeling almost unable to believe this was real. These were her people now. This was her community. This was her home. As the evening wound down and people began preparing to leave, Patricia approached Sarah with a small wrapped box. "I have something for you," she said with a warm smile. Sarah carefully unwrapped it to find a delicate ornament inside, a small glass heart with a tiny house painted inside it, and the words, "Home is where the heart is," written in gold script. "Patricia, it's beautiful," Sarah breathed. "I want you to hang it on your tree," Patricia said. "And every year when you put it up, I want you to remember this year. Remember that feeling of coming home, not just to a place, but to yourself, to love, to belonging. Remember that you are always welcome, always valued, always loved." Sarah hugged her tightly, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. When she pulled back, she saw that most of the room had gone quiet, watching the exchange. Emma was wiping her eyes. Daniel was smiling with such love and pride that Sarah felt it like a physical warmth. "I want to say something," Sarah said, her voice a bit shaky but growing stronger. "Last Christmas Eve, I was the loneliest I've ever been in my life. I'd lost my marriage, moved to a new place where I didn't know anyone, and I felt invisible. I felt like I'd never belong anywhere again. I remember standing in my apartment that morning, looking out at families and couples walking by, and feeling like I was watching life happen through glass, completely separate from it all. I'd convinced myself that I'd used up my chance at happiness, that I'd had my turn at belonging, and somehow I'd failed at it. I thought that was just going to be my reality from then on, existing, but not really living, going through motions, but never truly connecting." She paused, her eyes getting misty as she looked around at the faces watching her with such attention and love. "And then this man," she gestured to Daniel, "saw me standing outside his house and did something that changed everything. He didn't have to stop. He didn't have to talk to me. He had a million reasons to just wave and go back inside, but he chose kindness. He chose to see me, really see me, not just glance past me the way most people do when they encounter someone who seems lonely or lost. He invited me in. He and his incredible family welcomed a complete stranger into their Christmas celebration and treated me like I mattered. Patricia," she turned to face the older woman directly, "you hugged me within 30 seconds of meeting me. Do you know how long it had been since someone had hugged me like that? Like they genuinely wanted to, not out of obligation. You made me feel wanted immediately. Emma, you handed me wine and started talking to me like we'd been friends for years, including me in your jokes and your stories. Sophie and Michael, you treated me like I was someone special, not someone to be wary of. Thomas, Linda, Rachel, James, Robert, every single one of you made space for me at your table and in your hearts without hesitation." Her voice broke slightly, but she pushed forward. You gave me back something I'd lost. Hope. Hope that I could build a new life, make new connections, find love and belonging again. You showed me that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice and openness and generosity of spirit. You chose me when you had absolutely no reason to, and that choice saved me. She paused, taking a moment to look around the room at all the faces watching her with such warmth and affection. And look at where I am now. Look at this room full of people I love and who love me back. Look at this life I get to live. Every single person here has contributed to that in some way. You've all made me feel welcome, valued, seen. You've become my family, my community, my home. And I just want you to know how grateful I am, how much it means to me, how much you all mean to me. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Emma started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. Sarah felt Daniel's arm around her waist, anchoring her, supporting her. She looked up at him and saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes: joy, gratitude, love, hope for the future. You did leave everyone in tears, Daniel whispered in her ear with a gentle laugh. Happy tears, but still tears. Sarah laughed too, wiping at her own wet cheeks. I guess I did, but they're the best kind of tears. As people finally began to leave, bundled up against the cold December night, they each hugged Sarah tightly, thanked her for a wonderful evening, and made plans to see her again soon. When it was finally just Sarah, Daniel, and Charlie in the quiet house, surrounded by the aftermath of a successful party, Sarah sank down onto the couch with a satisfied sigh. Tired? Daniel asked, sitting beside her and pulling her into his arms. Exhausted, Sarah admitted, but in the best possible way. The kind of tired that comes from doing something meaningful, from being with people you love. It was a perfect evening, Daniel said. You were amazing. Watching you tonight, so happy and confident and surrounded by people who adore you, I just kept thinking about that woman I saw standing outside my house a year ago. The transformation is incredible. That's what love does, Sarah said softly. Real love, the kind that accepts you and supports you and believes in you. It transforms everything. You and your family gave me that gift. You helped me transform from someone who was lost and lonely into someone who belongs. Someone who has a home, not just in a physical place, but in people's hearts. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the lights twinkle on the Christmas tree. Charlie had fallen asleep on his bed by the fireplace, snoring softly. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon and all the delicious food they'd eaten. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, fat flakes drifting past the windows like a scene from a snow globe. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked after a while. I'm thinking about next Christmas, Sarah said, and the one after that, and all the Christmases to come. I'm thinking about how we'll have our own traditions, our own stories, our own memories to build. I'm thinking about how lucky I am to have found you, to have found this place, to have found myself again. And I'm thinking about other people out there right now who might be feeling the way I felt last year, alone and invisible and hopeless. And I'm making myself a promise that I'll try to see them. I'll try to invite them in. I'll try to pass on the gift your family gave to me. Daniel kissed the top of her head. That's why I love you. That huge heart of yours. Even after everything you went through, you came out of it with more compassion, not less. More openness, not less. More willingness to be vulnerable and take risks, not less. I learned from the best, Sarah said, snuggling closer to him. I learned that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. Sometimes the biggest risk is staying closed off and protected instead of opening up to possibility. As midnight approached, marking the official beginning of Christmas Day, Daniel and Sarah moved to the window to watch the snow fall over the sleeping town. The church bells began to chime, their sound carrying clearly through the cold night air. Daniel took Sarah's hand and squeezed it gently. Merry Christmas, Sarah. Here's to our first of many. Merry Christmas, Daniel. Thank you for everything. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for loving me. Always, he said simply, always. And as they stood there together, surrounded by the evidence of a life rebuilt, of connections forged, of love found, Sarah felt a peace so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. She'd been through heartbreak and loss. She'd experienced loneliness that felt like it would swallow her whole. But she'd also experienced the incredible power of human kindness, the transformative nature of genuine welcome, and the way that opening your heart, even when it's terrifying, can lead to more joy than you ever imagined possible. She thought about that moment a year ago, standing outside Daniel's house, watching the warm glow of family and togetherness through the windows, and feeling so separate from it all. If only she could go back and tell that version of herself that everything was going to be okay. That in just a few minutes, a kind man would come outside and extend an invitation that would change everything. That saying yes to that invitation would be the first step toward building an entire new life. But maybe that's not how transformation works. Maybe you can't know in advance that things will get better. Maybe you just have to take the risk, accept the invitation, open the door, and trust that on the other side of your fear and pain might be something beautiful, something real, something worth every moment of uncertainty and vulnerability. Sarah had found her home, and it wasn't just a place on a map or a house on a street. It was in the laughter of newfound friends, the warmth of a family that had chosen her, the love of a man who saw her truly, the wag of a dog's tail, the smell of cookies baking, the sound of church bells on Christmas morning, the feeling of belonging that came from being genuinely welcomed and valued. As she and Daniel finally headed to bed, leaving the Christmas lights to twinkle through the night, Sarah took one last look around her home. This beautiful, imperfect, joy-filled life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. And she smiled, because sometimes the most wonderful gifts come wrapped in unexpected packages. Sometimes salvation comes from a stranger who sees you when you thought you were invisible. Sometimes family is something you find rather than something you're born into. And sometimes, just sometimes, if you're brave enough to accept an invitation and open your heart one more time, you discover that the story isn't over. It's just beginning. So if you're out there right now feeling lonely, feeling invisible, feeling like you'll never belong anywhere again, please hear this. You matter. You are seen. Your story isn't over. And maybe, just maybe, your invitation is coming. Your Daniel is out there. Your new beginning is waiting. All you have to do is be brave enough to say yes when it arrives. Stay open, stay hopeful, stay willing to take risks on connection and community and love. Because that's where the magic lives. That's where transformation happens. That's where you discover that home was never just a place. It was always people. It was always love. It was always the courage to show up as your authentic self and let others see you, really see you, in all your beautiful, imperfect humanity. Merry Christmas to all of you watching this, wherever you are in the world. May you find your invitation. May you find your welcome. May you find your home. And if you already have it, may you never take it for granted. May you always remember how precious it is to be seen, to be valued, to belong. And hey, if you enjoyed Sarah's story of transformation from loneliness to love, from isolation to belonging, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling me what home means to you, or share a time when someone's unexpected kindness changed your life. I love reading your stories and connecting with this incredible community we're building together. Until next time, stay cozy, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the magic of Christmas, not just in December, but all year long. Because the real magic isn't in the presents or the decorations or even the special day itself. The real magic is in the human connections we make, the love we share, and the way we show up for each other when it matters most. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. I'll see you in the next story.